Good morning, Vietnam. Yes, indeed. It's me, the old Maxie, the big dog G, coming back from the east side. Beep, beep, beep. Um, so I woke up this morning, powered up the old brain, press a little button in the back of the head. Now, I didn't really power down too well last night, to be honest. I was quite restless. You can see it in my eyes. My girlfriend was snoring like a mad thing beside me. I could hear the sound of my baby growing bigger by the second. And the sound is not something that is clear like a wah, wah. No, it's the sound of the inevitable. It's like reality just represented by the pink elephant. And the pink elephant is sleeping beside me. The beautiful pink elephant is sleeping beside me. And she holds within her the key to my future. Whatever this little guy is going to bring, he's going to bring extra responsibility. He's going to bring a situation where when I look into his little eyes, I'm going to see responsibility on my part. I'm going to see like a version of me staring back at me saying, you better get your shit together, pal. I mean, I'm not going to be goo guying for much longer. I'm like strolling around now, just drooling all over myself, sucking on your girlfriend's titty. But in another 2 years, my teeth are going to be sprouting out. I'm going to be putting my first bit of words together. And then I'm going to start wreaking havoc on you. And at that point, you better have your game on, because I don't think I want to be going to school in some Asian, in some Chinese or some Vietnamese little institute. So I'm going to be reading all of that in the momentary glances between me and the infant. And in the apparent silence between me and my girlfriend as she sleeps and snores next to me, me and my mind as I attempt to unwind, I hear that little, I'm coming, baby. You better get ready for me, because I'm going to be there very soon, mofo. Reality. How do you spell reality, everybody? Or E A L I T. Yeah. Why? For anybody who doesn't know what the hell that was about, it's actually a spelling technique we use in teaching our kindergarten, who are still getting used to their phonics. So we ask them to spell a word. When they can't spell the word, we give them the sound. The sound then gives them the letter. So if we say they go, yeah, teacher, it's an A. Schooling is fun. You know, I got my groove between the public school and the new CEC place, which is just around the corner. The apartment we're in is still comfortable, as I've mentioned before. It's a nice 2-bed. We got the TV, we got the 2 swimming pools, and we got the gym. What can I say? Josh from down the hall has got an apartment like twice the size. And the difference between our place and his place is only like $100. So here is something interesting for you to hear if you are ever looking back at this from 15 to 16 years down the line, or whatever, 18 or 20. You probably invented God knows what time travel, and virtual reality is just taking on whole new proportions. You're probably sitting beside me right now in a virtual world, watching me from here as I tell you about what it was like trying to put up with you as you were a fetus. The apartment that Josh has is like twice the size, giant master room, giant balcony, giant sitting room, literally twice the bloody size, and for $100. So anybody who I've mentioned this to, they've said, yeah, geez, that's a no-brainer. Like, why don't you take his? He's paid him because it was just him there at all times. You've got a baby on the way. The amount of shit that you're going to have lying around was, double the size, 10 meters down the hall, that you'd leap on it. It's only $100 extra a month. We're earning like $25 an hour. If again, you're watching this in 15, 20 years down the line, I'm guessing that you would have seen the kind of irrationality between my thinking and your mother's thinking when it comes to minute spending. So let's say I don't really give a damn about the price of a 20th electronic cigarette that I just bought because I did it for the hell of it, just because I'm not drinking at the moment. Sticking to the tea. Who knows? Maybe you'll know a little bit more about it. But look, that's my 6 minutes and 48 seconds into my new little go live podcast thing. I've been jumping between this, and I've also been sharing my thoughts on my new podcast machine. Check it out, baby. I've been putting together a series on the economy, economists, international economy. I've been learning. I've been trying to put my brain to good use. I've been trying to alleviate the fears and anxieties that I have had to deal with on a kind of a threefold increase scenario since the news of you came along. The purpose of this first one, actually, to be honest, it's not to talk to you. This whole thing is about me talking to me talking to me for the benefit of me, and me talking to me for the benefit of storytelling, for the purpose of setting a few things straight. Because I don't have the time to open up the word pad to start using my big fat fingers to put together the adequate words to describe what some of the stuff is that I went through before I got to this point where your little pitter patter is on the way. It's the story of my rock bottom, and it's a difficult ass story, and it has a prelude, and it has quite a long prelude, and it's like a cartoon that plays out in the back of my head, just this little reel that keeps on turning. And it's good for me because without that little reel playing 24/7, I would quite possibly be finding other ways to vent my excess energy or to deal with the fears and anxieties channel my fears and anxieties in a different way. Whether that would be, I don't know, driving around Honkiem, snatching purses randomly just for shits and giggles. I could break into the local zoo and try and seduce a giraffe. Well, here's one that's really not so obvious. I could pick up a bottle of Hanoi vodka and just go crazy. So yeah, I wouldn't snatch purses. I wouldn't seduce giraffes. I wonder, and a little bit down the line, what type of personality are you going to have? I would hope that you would have something a little bit similar to mine. The decisions that I make in the coming years will probably shape what kind of person you are, if you are actually listening to this. I presume you're living in an age where everything is completely different. You're looking at this kind of thinking, uh, yeah, he probably does have pretty groovy hair, but these days we all have purple and green and pink hair. You could be living in an age where the means of communication is by pressing a little button on the side of your head, telepathically sending an email to your colleagues, text messaging through your eyeballs, telekinesis and other forms of lifting. Yeah, it's not outside the realm of possibility. Who knows what type of situation you're watching this, if indeed you are watching this. Or will I be watching it? Will I be watching this in years of time? I'm certainly not going to be back watching it in the next week or two. If anybody else is watching this, I know that nobody wants to really hear it, and you were like, at the time, you played your role. And I hope that maybe as I tell this story, you might get a better grasp as to where I was and how I dealt with the situation that each of you guys put me in. And yeah, I will say, you did put me in a situation, even though it was myself that inflicted all that misery. I was alienated and isolated in a time when everything that I did seemed to turn everything to shit. So 12 minutes into it, let's go. Brown to brass tacks. In 2011, your grandfather died. So my dad, Conor McGuire VI, the crazy lunatic, the man with the red beard, riddled with eccentricities, full of flair and enthusiasm that was unbeatable, renowned about the community as the idiosyncratic, is that the right word? Idiosyncratic? The strange oddball architect who sort you out with a certificate of compliance retrospectively, which basically meant that you get a phone call from some guy to say, Connor, listen, I'm in a pickle. I'm trying to get my certs together. I'm trying to get my title on the house together so that I can sell it. It turns out that at the time, while we were putting the house together, certain big building regulations were overlooked. The compliance law now would say that I should have done X, Y, and Z back when I was building it. And I need to find a dodgy architect to sign a certificate to say that the things that I should have done, which are contained in law, which nobody even bothers to read, but that I actually did comply with them. And you just have to sign sign your name on the piece of paper, send it to me, and I can get my house sold. In the situation, he made his bread and butter from certificates of compliance, because they were just sent into the county council and nobody ever went out to check and see whether A, B, or C hadn't actually been complied with. He died in 2011 suddenly from addiction. At the time in our family, we had 3 addicts. There was me, there was Rowan, and there was him. He lived a different life as an addict because he didn't become an addict until a very late time of his life. He enjoyed a comfortable life because his family were well off and because they had to travel. Your great-grandfather was a circuit court judge and took a job with the European Union in the competition authority, essentially requiring both him and your great-grandmother, Katrina, who I hope is still alive when you were born, might quite possibly will be. They spent most of their time in Brussels and just gave the keys of their house to my dad, who used it as a party house and went a little bit nuts. He had his own tab on a shop down the road. All he had to do was just drink drug, and drive. And he had easily all of those things that he could just do whenever he wanted. After his death, things were not easy. And it seemed to me and Ronan that at that time, the conglomerate of women in the family, well, it was only Sarah and Mum, so conglomerate is wrong. And Niall to a certain extent, but he was living in Australia. They could easily then draw a line and say, well, from now on, the way we're dealing with addicts is this. If you're going to inflict yourself with misery and you're going to continue to do that kind of damage to yourself, well, then you can very kindly remove yourself from the immediacy of our surroundings. Do it where you want to do it, and don't bloody come to us moaning about your lives when you suddenly find out that a life of drinking and drugging is not an easy one. So me and Ronan got a house together, an apartment on Mead Street, right in the heart of Knackerville, a pretty rough part of Dublin. He had a very different addiction to me. I was addicted to uppers and alcohol. He was addicted to downers and needles. We took care of each other in a strange kind of way, in that he bought 2 pet rats and kept them under a table, actual rats. I started dating a girl called Emma Rice. It could have been love or some type of variant of it. I was very fond of her, and there was an agreement that the two of us were going to go to Australia together. So that's what we were kind of saving for. I had my finals in PPC1. I had to finish my exams, and I had to drink and take drugs in order to get through them. I actually snorted 2 lines of butylone before I went in to sit the medical negligence exam. I don't know why I keep on saying that, but I was medically negligent. Was I medically negligent when I got 62% in that particular exam? The failure rate of 50% was always likely. I passed the exams. I waited around for a little while. It turned out that Emma was never really going to move to town anyway, and she was actually falling in love with my brother, unbeknownst to him, who couldn't see the writing on the wall. I could see that there was a bond developing between the two of them. I thought he would have respected it. He didn't, and one day she jumped on him in a situation where we were in the middle of an argument. She thought, well, what's the best way to get out of this? I'll just sleep with his brother, break his heart, fuck everything up, and then shadow this, or just see what type of storm that creates. And then, you know, I guess that Connor will be so devastated by what I've done that the breakup will be well and truly underway. It's a kind of a Wicklow Town thing. People in Wicklow Town don't really give a shit about their partners, and are very much prepared to sleep around if they so please, to the detriment of their long-term partners. Anyway, moving along, a short time later, then I jumped on a plane and I went to Australia. But I went via, first of all, Holland, because I missed my connecting flight. My friend Ricky gave me a Casio watch as a going away party, and the Casio watch hadn't been put back that 1 hour. The clocks had just gone forward. He gave me the watch without putting that clock forward, so that when I was in Amsterdam, probably with 0.5 gram of cocaine stuck up my nose. I had been partying all the night before with Sex Shop Paul and Derek and Ronan in Dublin, in and out of casinos. Mum collected me about 6 o'clock from that place where Sarah used to live up by the Easton Street Bridge. She brought me out to the airport, put me on the plane, even in the condition that I was in, where I hadn't slept in so long. I was still trying to fool her into believing that there was some kind of sobriety going on. I think she knew I was a head case, and it wasn't going I was going nowhere fast. So when I found out that in Amsterdam, I had to stay over in Amsterdam, well, that was just fine with me. I had to pay for another flight, but it also meant that I had 2 days on a session. So you can imagine what a man who had just found out that his brother had slept with his girlfriend, who had like saved 4 to 5 thousand euro to start a new life in Australia, who was on his way to Australia via Southeast Asia. So looking forward to a nice little 2 or 3 month stint there. Suddenly finds himself in Holland. Woohoo! That was a good 2 days. There were red lights. There were white bags. Somebody boxed me in the head for telling them that we were in a restaurant and I quickly asked, could I use the toilet? I can't remember whether I genuinely wanted to use the toilet or I wanted to snort something. But some guy was rude and I immediately said something to do with him being rude. And in the middle of it, I might have said something about him being black. Box into the jaw. So I had a black eye for the second half of the day, the second half of my trip. Anyway, eventually I got on a plane, got to Bangkok, got wrecked. I should have flown from Bangkok to Cambodia, but at the time they still had those signs that said €20 air-conditioned bus will have you in Cambodia in 5 hours, when in actual fact it was €25, 20 hours, and you're on a bus where the woman next to you has just got a box full of chickens. Literally, people will poo in a bowl and lean across you and throw it out the window. That might have been in Cambodia, or it might well have been in South America, because the same kind of things were happening there. I got to Cambodia, and that's where I met my good man TK. He was already over there, and the plan was just to stay there for a month or two and get to Australia with enough to, at the very least, tide me over for a little while. But that didn't happen. Beers were 50 cents a pop, and I decided just to blow all my money. I was staying in hotels for $7 a night, so I would just spend like a week to 2 weeks in one place. Then I'd jump in a taxi and go down the road, spend a week or 2 weeks in another place, jump in a taxi, go down the road, spend a week or 2 weeks in another place. And I just did this constant little twirl around Cambodia. It was good fun. And I just drank and drank and drank. There were some drugs, but not too many. When I got to Australia eventually, through the drinks and the reels, by the skin of my teeth and the hair on my chinny chin, I arrived in Australia, and Niall at the time was living with Ducky in a house on 333 Punt Road, which was right across the road from the famous Aussie Rules stadiums, the MGM or whatever the hell it was called again. It was a nice house, and he was living with Matt and he was living with Ducky, and neither of those two guys had any problem with me throwing my head down on the couch. Niall at the time was going out with Vanny, and Vanny was really the one who had a problem with me. I proceeded to drink as much as I could, given that I didn't have much money. That actually was fuck all. And I immediately realized how difficult it was to get by in Australia with a drinking habit the likes of what I had racked up. I thought that I could get a job as a lawyer. I didn't leave myself enough time or money to be able to even explore that avenue. So very quickly, what I found was that I simply had to start competing for the backpacker jobs. So I would go to a interview. It would be a group interview. There would be like 10 other backpackers from all over Europe. I would be sitting around in a circle trying to sell myself as this guy who's far more capable of going from door to door, selling like plugs to plug as many things into these little electricity efficient 4-part adapters, and we were giving them away for free. I did that for a couple of days. I did some telesales. I tried to work for a company called sellyourcarfast.com. I would ring people up and ask them about the car that they were trying to sell and offer them about 30% of their asking price. I know nothing about cars. The job was a nightmare. I lasted about 5 or 6 days. Then I started with Niall's racket, the UNHCR, standing on a street and stopping people and asking them, hey, have you got a moment of time to consider the starving people in Africa? You blag them, you pitch them, you try and get them to sign up $50 a month. Out of that $50, probably $1 goes to the starving kid. $49 goes to, let's call a spade because Niall was the one who set up his own company doing this. A huge chunk of cash would go into Niall's pocket, which he then began to save and accumulate in whatever way he did. Didn't pay his taxes, but has said in between sessioning that the amount of money that he started making when he first set up his company was astronomical. And that I will mention a little bit later on when this little thing that you say to me about how I should be so grateful to you for the help. I am grateful, but there's a caveat. If you've got if you're making 200,000, whatever it is, if you're making hands over fist, like tons of cash, you get a phone call from your brother who's like down and out. Instead of pontificating and giving him a big bloody spiel about how everybody's worried, and then being tight-arsed enough to give him like a little bit of money in dribs and drabs, you sent me like $90 and somehow you expected that to last for like 2 or 3 days. You sent me another few quid another day. Yeah, you paid for my hotel. Altogether, you gave me 400 Australian dollars, which equates to about $200. The time when I had an emergency, I couldn't do fucking squabbly shit with that. So, yeah, that's a little bit down the line. Australia turned into a pantomime, a cartoon. I went back to my bow boy ways and I began to wheel and deal. The truth is, I would order large quantities of replica, analog, fake recreational drugs from China. And I would successfully land it in a country where what I spent $2 on per unit would then be worth $350. So you can see where the mess could come from. Like, the quantities were always in bulk because that's the way they sold them. There was no point in buying small amounts. You had to buy big. When you have big amounts, you try and get rid of it for as much money as possible. But because it's so cheap, you just try and restock. The inevitability of being surrounded nonstop by drugs, then, of course, it's just, that's what happened. And I lived in a situation where I just drank and drugged for 2 years in Australia. I met some crazy people. My good friend Liam, I'm still in contact with right now. He's down on his luck and I'm still helping him. We're trying to get some money together to buy him a caravan so that he can sleep in the back of somebody's garden. They're going to put a little caravan in a garden in the back. This guy is one of the most genuine guys you'd ever come across. Liam and his dog. Fond memories. The Irish guys, whole different story. Crazy bastards. The guy from New Zealand, what was his name? Alex from New Zealand. He was crazy. He was one of the many people who were addicted to crystal meth at the time. So we were basically renting this house where I was paying the rent on everything, thinking that I was king of the world, and that if I kept on juggling all these balls, that eventually the cash cow would come home to roost, if that's even the right expression, and everything would fall into place and everybody would have plenty of money. And if everybody could just chill out and give me some time to get this right, and in no time at all, we would all be rich. And I think it was Elstonrick. Elstonrick was the place where the house was. We ended up spray painting the walls. I was like a lunatic. And I think I'm just gonna save those moments, that cartoon, that house, as one of the times when I was well and truly sizzled. And they were good times. They were good times. Anyway, from there, Dino, who was an absolute dick, he was supposed to be a friend. He ended up ripping me off of everything that I had and giving me an ultimatum that I only had a certain amount of time to get out of the city, even though he was supposed to be a friend and he was the one who owed me money. I wanted to get out of the city anyway, so I went up to Perth to a friend of mine, Sideways Simon, who was a crazy man from New Zealand who used to walk everywhere without any sandals on his feet. And he built sandcastles for a living. And we had a connection because he was a heavy drinker. And I used to really enjoy going down in the morning and watching him build sandcastles and then make a fortune. We would go down and buy bags of beer and sit around. I would drink the beer. He would do the same, but he would build these beautiful, intricate sandcastles for 3 or 4 hours, and then he would leave them with a little box in front of the castle, and people would drop their money into the little box. He would come back at 4 o'clock, and the box would be full. He would take the money, and then he would leave, and then he would come back again a few hours later. The box would be full again. He'd get a second dose, second pile of cash. He made about $350 a day. We lived together with a guy called Danny Belden in a house not so far from the beach. Waterford Drive, it was called, ironically. I called it the time machine. There was a swimming pool at the back. It was a nice sized house. And for the most part, I slept in either the couch or a blow-up mattress in Danny's kid's bedroom. I had no idea where the fuck I was going or what I was doing. I didn't want to get back to Ireland. I was still wheeling and dealing, but it was hit and miss. I just wanted to make enough to be able to get out of there. And my sanity was very fragile at the time. But I love those guys. Danny and Simon, if you do end up listening to this, I doubt you will. But those were crazy times, man. Me and Simon would drive up in this broken down car that would probably break down 2 out of the 3 times that we actually took it out on the road. And we'd drive up to get our crates of beer. And that would normally be at about lunchtime. And we would drink a crate of beer before 8 or 9 o'clock every day. And there was drugs involved because at that time I was still allegedly a bold boy. So in Perth, actually, I was always surrounded by like a bunch of weirdos who were doing the exact opposite kind of recreational drugs to me. And while they were heavy drinkers, we were on a completely different wavelength. So if you look at what Ireland is, me growing up in Ireland and the drugs that we took there, very different to what happened to everybody who grew up in Australia. So people who grew up in Australia would say, oh, here's some nice marijuana. And then the next step after that was crystal meth. So quite a significant amount of people would make that leap from there to there very quickly and become addicts at a very young age. So most of the people that I ended up gravitating towards became these kinds of people who were drug addicts, but different types of drug addicts to me. And we had a bond that was only so thick that the bond was only such that we were together because we were burning the midnight oil. We both did the same kind of thing, and that's what happens when people do those kind of things. For the type of person who stays up really late doing nothing, lost in his own misery and his loneliness, which at the time you don't actually think it's misery and loneliness. It perpetuates itself so that the next fix is the answer, and addiction will be a different chapter. But eventually I got enough money together and I said goodbye to Simon, said goodbye to Danny, jumped on a plane and landed in Bali. I had a great time in Bali for 2 weeks, which I won't get into. There was a little bit of Lambok. I was there with Michael Clancy. I'm going to leave it at that. The next chapter will be about my time in the Philippines. My story will continue up to now in little brief little 30-minute snippets. So that's the end of this one.